All right, Brad. Well, why don't we get started? It looks like we've got at least a critical mass of attendees, and I'm sure more people will come. And anyone who's watching this as a recording, hopefully this is informative and welcome. So welcome, everybody. My name is Rob Burnett. I'm the CEO here at Netcapital Funding Portal. And I am here today with Brad Larson from Avadain. Brad, welcome. Thanks for being with us.
Well, thanks, Rob. I really appreciate it. And I know it's very late for you being in the UK. So
No
thanks for
worries.
staying with me.
Happy to be here. So for anyone, obviously everyone got the invite, but we're going to do kind of a final Q&A here with Avadain. We are, coming into the closing hours of their campaign. And we thought it'd be nice to give everyone who's either already invested, and just another chance to hear from Brad, or for anyone who's making a final decision to kind of hear about the company, learn about a couple of the more recent updates, and just dig in a little bit to what Avadain's doing and where they're going from here. So for everyone who's here listening live, there is a Q&A feature that you can see on your Zoom. If anyone would like to ask questions throughout the webinar here, or the Q&A, please do. We'd love to hear from you. We'd love to answer your questions. Just put them in the chat and I'll ask them as and when appropriate. But in the meantime, Brad, for anyone who might be unfamiliar with Avadain, why don't we kick it off with, can you just give me kind of the 1 to 2 minute overview of what it is and who you are?
Sure, absolutely. And first, let me say, Rob, I really appreciate your setting up this opportunity. And I'm also blown away by the number of participants. I see we've got a really nice mix of existing investors and potential new investors. So I really do encourage you, please, this is your final opportunity to ask questions. Load it up. I'm here to answer your questions. And that's the really primary reason for this. So what is Avadain? Avadain is a graphene technology company. Graphene, I'll get into in a minute what graphene is, but we have a patented environmentally friendly technology to manufacture very high quality graphene. That's our claim to fame. That's the market niche that we believe that we dominate based on the technology that we have. So that begs the question, what is graphene? Graphene is the lightest, strongest, most thermally conductive, most electrically conductive material ever discovered. It was first isolated by two researchers at the University of Manchester in England in 2004. And they won the Nobel Prize in Physics in 2010 for that discovery. It's really it has very humble origins. They start with graphite, which is pencil lead, and it's really a lump of the most uninteresting material that you'll ever come across. But it turns out that when you separate it down to an atomic layer, it takes on these absolutely fantastic qualities. Physicists around the world are still amazed at the discoveries they're making about graphene. And so adding a little bit of graphene to other materials makes them better. So that's what Avadain's mission is. It's to first create high quality graphene. That work was done by the Fraunhofer Institute for Applied Solid State Physics between 2016 and 2020, and then to provide industrial quantities of it. That's why we formed Avadain, for that specific purpose. And that work is currently being done by Southwest Research Institute in San Antonio. And so we are now on the precipice of being able to demonstrate continuous production. We hope to do that on December 11th when we bring a group of stakeholders down to SWRI to see the creation of graphene in a continuous fashion so that it can be upscaled to produce tons of it.
Very exciting, Brad. And thanks for letting us know. Kind of diving right in on that. I believe you made an announcement recently about Harcos Chemicals.
Yes.
Am I pronouncing that correctly?
Harcross.
Harcross Chemicals. Does that have to do with the manufacturing?
Absolutely. We've signed a letter of intent with an advanced materials company, a U.S.-based advanced materials company, They have international operations. They have plants in 19 states in the United States. So it's mid-sized by the chemical industry standards, but it's a big company. And they want to be the first manufacturer of our graphene. They want to have that first mover advantage. So we just made the announcement on Monday of the agreement, the signing of the letter of intent. We're now negotiating a definitive license agreement. We hope to sign that in December. It may be that it bleeds over until January, but we're working on it, and we're dead keen about it. And that's important because there are any number of companies that have approached us really because of our crowdfunding campaign. They heard about us through crowdfunding and have approached us to say, hey, we want to use your graphene flakes in this application and that application. The problem we've had is we didn't yet have a manufacturer. And so what's really exciting about the agreement with Harcross is that they seek to manufacture tons of our graphene flakes so they can now begin to provide industrial quantities of our graphene to these many end users. So that's really it's a tremendous milestone for us.
As congratulations about that, and thanks everyone who's already. I've already got some questions coming in here. We'll get to those in a second. If you have questions, please throw them in. But on that, again, on that train of thought, Brad. So you talk about all this is going to give you the ability to start producing for customers. Can you talk to everybody a little bit about like what do those customers look like? What's a customer of Avadain going to be looking like? What are they going to use graphene for? I know you said there's a lot of different uses for it, but what can people expect?
Sure. Let's take one really very basic industry, concrete. Concrete is the most ubiquitous, the most common building material in the world. There are, millions and millions of tons of concrete produced annually. But there are a few problems with concrete. First, if concrete were a country, it would be the third largest CO2 emitter in the world, following China and the United States. The production of concrete it creates greenhouse gases just in astronomical quantities. Plus, there are all sorts of environmental fallout from the manufacture of graphene. If you use a small amount, maybe 3% by volume of graphene, you can reduce the volume of concrete in almost any application by at least 30%. And you'll come out with a stronger product that doesn't chip as much and lasts substantially longer. And so adding a little bit of graphene goes a long way in that particular application. But let's talk about something that I think people can identify with a little bit more personally, and that is electric vehicles. Right now, it takes a long time to charge an electric vehicle battery. And the reason is that the anode, the positive charge, where the current goes into, is made of a substance, generally, I mean, there are different ones, but generally it's spherical graphite. And the reason spherical graphite is used is because it can withstand high heat, but it's not a particularly good conductor of electricity. So you force the electricity in, a lot of that electricity is lost to heat because of the resistance, and it takes hours to charge your battery. Everybody's frustrated about that. If we replace the spherical graphite with the 3 atomic layers of graphene, you can charge your electric vehicle battery in minutes, not hours. You'll lose almost no electricity to heat. And the damage that's caused to the engine because of the heat, that problem goes away. So there is just another example. And literally, there are thousands of other examples of how a little bit of graphene can make a big difference to transform products.
Super exciting stuff. Let's dive into some of the user questions or the investor questions, because we've got a bunch piling up. So let's get into those. I'm not going to go, please keep asking. I'm not going to go in particular order. I'm going to try and keep this kind of the conversation flowing. So first, we've got a question from Eugene. will Avadain work with companies from a technology standpoint to help them develop uses? So I think, are you guys going to help people develop uses, or are you just going to provide the materials?
Okay, so we're trying to create a value chain that makes sense. We are not greedy. We think we have a tremendous economic opportunity for us by focusing only on manufacturing. So what we will do is get our mission, our promise was 1 manufacturer this year, 3 next year, and then we will grow beyond that. So we're going to spend our time and expertise getting that manufacturer up to speed. We will be hiring an implementation manager soon, head of licensing soon, and we will work with that manufacturer. It will be that manufacturer's job through its sales force to then work on the applications development with their customers, the people who will then buy graphene from them and use it in their specific application. Of course, we'll be as helpful as we can throughout the entire value chain, but we want to set up a mechanism that allows for rapid growth, because this truly is a global market. And by 2030, I don't think it's much of a stretch to say that graphene will touch virtually every person's life every day. In some way or other, graphene is going to be a part of everyone's life.
Great, thanks. And thanks, Eugene. Great question. Moving on to the next one. So from Rodney here. Brad, what is the risk that some other competitors with inferior, smaller sized platelets that aren't really viable to manufacture real products will be able to improve their products, resulting in real competitive products? So you basically, what are the chances your competitors catch up?
Right. Okay. So what I'd like to do is share the screen and put up a chart. If you'll give me 1 second, I'm not nearly as good at this as Rob is. I really should take lessons. Let me see if I can get this up here. Show windows. Here we go.
Great.
Can you see that, Rob?
Yep, we can see it.
Okay, so this is the competitive landscape. So I'm going to address Rodney's question in a slightly broader way. Okay, 3,000 atomic layers or more is graphite. Graphite, very common substance, not very expensive. It's used for many, many different applications. Graphene is just one of many. Between 10 atomic layers and 3,000 layers is a material called nanoplatelets. That's a stack of graphene, but it doesn't have, because it's so large, it doesn't have the really fantastic properties of graphene. It has some transitional benefits to it. Here's where the magic occurs. 30 microns in lateral flake size. That's where the optimal strength of graphene begins. Below that, graphene is brittle, and it has little or no mechanical strength. And according to the German company Bosch, in a 3-year study they recently published, the larger the flake size, the better the electrical conductivity. So the question is, where is Avadain? We are here in this bottom right quadrant. Our graphene flakes are large. We have the only known technology that's capable of gently separating the layers of graphite to preserve the naturally large flakes that exist in the graphite. All of the other methods, and there are 19 known methods of creating graphene, break up those flakes. So they become very tiny, very little, typically in the 1 to 7 micron range, but even in the nanometer range, so an order of magnitude smaller. These flakes, we don't compete with these materials in this bottom left quadrant. There are more than 200 companies, according to the Graphene Council, who are currently making graphene in that part of the market. In reality, it's probably double that, probably 400. We don't compete with them. They compete with each other for low-tech, low-value applications like throwing graphene-like materials into road construction to make the roads last longer and have less potholes. Here we are in the right, where large flake size is needed in things like aerospace, in composites, in high value applications of concrete, where the tensile strength is critically important. That's our market. So the answer, I think, to Rodney is no one who needs these large, high performance graphene flakes will use smaller flakes instead. If you want to make a bulletproof vest, with graphene, you have to use our flakes, because we and others have tested the smaller flakes, and you don't want to be wearing a bulletproof vest that's brittle like those materials produce. So I think the answer, Rodney, is we do not envision ever competing with these smaller flakes. They compete very ferociously with each other, and China is the leading producer of these small, lower quality materials. They're widely available by the ton, but we don't get involved in them.
Brad, you just brought up China, and there's actually an investor who had a question about China. Rodney had a second question, but I'll go to Gene here.
Listen, if you let Rodney go, he'll ask questions all night long, let me tell you.
I'm sure. So Gene had a question here. Will China respect the patents Avadain has? So are you worried at all about kind of intellectual property theft?
So first, let me say that's a great question, and I'm going to give you a detailed answer because you deserve it. But hold on to your hat, okay? So, so we have a global portfolio. We have patents that have been granted in the U.S., in China, Japan, Russia, Europe, particularly Germany, all over the world. But our belief is that only countries that respect intellectual property rights will really honor those patents. And so we don't believe for a second that people in China aren't going to infringe our patents. Of course, they're going to do it. And as long as they sell their products in China, there's nothing we can do about it. I'm not even going to lose sleep. Okay. That's just the way the world works. But if they export that product to Japan or to the United States or to Germany, then we can file suit against them. And the reason is that we have composition of matter claims. So we can analyze through testing the composition of the graphene flake and claim the ownership of that flake through our patent. So we can block them from exporting to countries that respect intellectual property, but we can't keep them from competing and cheating in their own market. In fact, there have been people who have gone there to try to prevent this from happening, and they wind up going to jail and getting fined because the Chinese figure out some act against the state that people are committing by demanding that their intellectual property be honored. So thank you. I'm not doing that. We're gonna stick to our knitting, and we're gonna be in the courts in developed countries.
Appreciate you walking us through that. That's I think a good strategy and a good good mindset to take into this for sure. You can drive yourself crazy if you worry about everything. So Rodney did have a second half of his question, which is, are you aware of any newer technologies that could change the current risk profile that you believe exists, but kind of between those other graphene makers and maybe new entrants to the market and yourselves?
So no is the answer, but I want to draw a distinction because people have heard of another material called borophene, and this is frequently confused with our market and our material. So there are two predominant types of graphene, and they're two different form factors. One is called graphene sheets. And this is a material that is an end product in and of itself. It's created synthetically by cracking methane. The hydrogen is captured for fuel source purposes. And then what's left is graphene. The graphene settles on a substrate. It aligns itself on the substrate and forms in whatever shape you want, but just think of it like a rectangle. And then you peel it off, and then you can use it in a sensor or something like that. It's a monolayer. It's a single layer of graphene, and that doesn't compete with us because it's a different form factor and it has different uses altogether. So in that market, there used to be carbon nanotubes, and then graphene sheets came and had, for the most part, not entirely, but for the most part, superior performance to carbon nanotubes. Now comes along a new material called borophene. Or boron nitride, even, and these are other ways of making sheets of material that, in some ways, have better performance than graphene sheets. They're still on the drawing board. They're still in the lab. It's probably, I mean, this is not my field, but just guessing, it's probably 10 years away from commercialization. But if I were in the graphene sheet business, I would be worried about that. In our part of the market, we don't really have any competitors because the qualities of graphene in these large, thin, and nearly defect-free graphene flakes currently are unrivaled. That doesn't mean that people in labs somewhere around the world, there are a lot of smart people who are trying to figure out something better. Sooner or later, somebody may figure that out. But we see nothing on the horizon right now that challenges that.
Great. Thanks, Brad. I'm going to take a quick break from questions just to remind everybody that we're having this Q&A because Avadain is currently raising capital on Netcapital. I'm going to put into the chat a link to Avadain's offering page on Netcapital. There you can read all about the offering, what's available, all the terms of the offering, things like that. So if anyone's got questions or wants to dig in a little bit more, who hasn't already made an investment, isn't already an investor, you can go to that link and you can see Avadain's investment page on Netcapital. You can read a little bit more about the investment, and I would encourage everyone to go, if you're planning to make an investment, make sure you read through it all, understand it. But I wanted to take a second to make sure that people knew that that's where they can go if they want to make an investment in Avadain or if they want to learn more. We've got a couple of questions, Brad, about kind of the manufacturing and supply. So one question here from David is this American manufacturing or overseas? Are you planning to create jobs for Americans?
So again, we're not going to manufacture any commercial scale production of graphene. Yes, we will have a pilot plant that produces samples, but that's really for the purpose of us optimizing the process and trying to figure out problems that may occur from a technical perspective. So we're going to be licensing manufacturers, one this year, which is Harcross, and then 3 next year to be identified. We're focused really only on the U.S. at the moment. There's no particular nationalistic reason for that. It's just that getting 3 licensees up and running next year is a monumentally large and complicated task. And it just makes sense to have people in the United States where we can, fly to meetings, sit down together, work out the agreement, work out the scaling plan and everything else. So we see that the U.S. is clearly the biggest market for graphene. There's ample room for growth here. Would we entertain having a facility in the UK? Absolutely. I think someone who wanted to license it in the UK, absolutely fine. Sticking to NATO countries and then the other group of friends, Japan, for example, Singapore, for example, all of that makes sense. There's no reason for us to play fast and loose here. We don't need to be going, to crazy places and trying to set up manufacturing. Our problem is we have to scale rapidly so that we dominate the market before any potential competitor comes in the future. That's what our focus is. And the only way we can do that is by getting more manufacturers up and running and producing ever larger quantities of graphene. The Graphene Council suggests or predicts that the demand for our kind of high quality graphene flakes will be between 30,000 and 90,000 metric tons by 2030. Each of our plants is modeled to produce 2 metric tons. So we have not only pent up demand, but projected really explosive growth. So looked at from that perspective, you know, being efficient is the way that we're going to get the maximum amount of production in line.
Thanks for walking us through that. And I think there is maybe, because we have another question here with someone who maybe knows, they're mentioning a company as a question from Eugene, a question called a company called Universal Matter. So will Universal Matter take over the supply since it will mass produce at a much greater quantity with their manufacturing process? So maybe that has something to do with the kind of confusion around your business model as a licensee or licensor.
Right. So Universal Matter creates a material that's more like graphene sheets than graphene flakes. Their material is not an additive. They use what's called the flash Joule method, which is they take basically any material, like really literally garbage, and they heat it to an insanely high level. It burns off everything except the carbon. The carbon that's left is actually graphene, and that settles. And then they have a process to create a sheet, if you will, of graphene from that. The difference is that their material has nanoscale graphene flakes. So it's between 15 and 200 nanometers. And I can't do the math in my head, but we're something between 50 and 100 times larger. So if you think of 30 microns in lateral flake size as being the optimal point, 30 or larger, they're several orders of magnitude smaller. So their graphene has many uses commercially, and it will never compete with what we're doing. And I should also mention that Universal Matter has adopted a completely different business model. From what I understand, they plan to build factories to actually make products out of their graphene. So they are currently looking to raise several $billion to be able to do that. And that's great, and I wish them a whole lot of success. George Gilder, who's a fan of ours, is also a fan of Universal Matter. But we want to be up and running in 2024, generating revenue and having other companies be successful making better products with our graphene, rather than trying to displace existing manufacturers with a product that we make from graphene, that Universal Matter makes from graphene. So they have a much more ambitious, much larger, 50-year plan for what they want to do. I'm focused on achieving an exit strategy between 2026 and 2028. So if you want to bet in something that's staggeringly large and will take place over time, assuming they can raise billions of dollars, they're a perfect investee company. We have a much more modest and, in my view, achievable objective.
You mentioned a couple of things there that I want to make sure I touch on, Brad. There's a couple of things going on, but why don't we start with, I think this might be a good opportunity. Do you want to just take everyone through kind of your business model for a second? I know we've touched on it throughout this conversation, but it might be nice to kind of walk everyone through that. How does Avadain plan to make money?
Absolutely. That's a great thing. And yes, I did take that for granted. So thank you for bringing me down to earth, Rob. I appreciate that.
No problem.
So Avadain, we look at this, we look at the graphene market as as having the potential of creating a new industrial revolution. And so the question is whether we want to make the new industrial revolution ourselves or whether we want to share and we want to partner with other people. And we chose to share and partner with other people. So we don't want to build factories to manufacture graphene because it will take us too long and it will take too much capital. And then we have to manage people and we have all kinds of operational issues. So we don't want to do that. What we want to do is license our technology to manufacturers who are already in the chemical industry or the advanced material industry. So they have the expertise, they have the plant and equipment, they have the systems, and most importantly, they already have customers. So they have sales forces that have customers that they can service. So we will license to them the right to make our graphene, and then they will produce it and sell it at first to their customers, and then presumably, hopefully, get new customers. We also will license the end user for specific purposes. That's called a field of use. So if somebody wants to make an electric vehicle battery anode for four-wheel passenger cars, we'll license our technology to them, our graphene to them, and grant them an exclusive right to that for a period of time, say 5 years. After that, it converts to a non-exclusive. Why do we do that? Because that helps the company to justify paying us money for that exclusive right, because they won't have any competitors. And then if they work hard and they're successful, they'll have 5 years in which to monetize it, which means that they can be the only company out there offering this really superior battery anode. After that, it converts to a non-exclusive, and presumably all of their competitors will then want to take non-exclusive licenses, so they will use it. So in the beginning, we create a funnel of customers based on the exclusive period. Once the exclusivity period ends, then the competitors come in, and we're often running with a much larger licensing base. Presumably also, what the plan is that we're adding new manufacturers all the time so that the production of graphene is growing. And so we have to scale in tandem both the amount of graphene that can reasonably be produced with the demands and needs of the end users. So that's our business model. It's licensing. And so what are the terms? We get a to be negotiated upfront payment for each license, and then a 10% royalty on the gross sales price of the graphene. We model the graphene at $100 per gram. And if we assume a 2 metric ton production line, that's gross sales of $200 million per year, 10% of that comes to us. So if we have 10 licensees, we get $200 million of recurring revenue. If we have 20 licensees, $40 million of recurring revenue. And so that's how the licensing model works. And as you might guess, that is a much, much more achievable and realistic business plan than building factories and trying to displace existing incumbent companies. We want to disrupt in a collaborative way industries where we're supporting our partners and our partners are supporting their customers, and everybody wins in that model. That's our approach.
Thanks for walking us through that. And Brad, you had dropped a name in your last response that I wanted to circle back to, George Gilder. I know there's been some announcements about him, and he's been talking about Avadain. Can you kind of talk about who he is, and what his connection to Avadain is?
Sure. Gilder is one of these legendary characters. He's now 84 years old. One of the most well-known things about him is that he was an advisor to President Reagan, and he told President Reagan he thought that semiconductors were going to be big, and he told Reagan that he really ought to focus on semiconductors because if the United States could somehow dominate that market, it could create a lot of jobs and be really transformative for the economy. So Gilder has for 40 years been making predictions on what the next big thing is. He refers to himself as America's #1 tech futurist, and he also has a proprietary subscription newsletter, which is widely read, and he makes periodically predictions on what industries are going to emerge and what the next big thing for his investors should be. So earlier this summer, he wrote a book and said that the graphene market is going to have the biggest disruption of anything ever in history. It would have an $11.5 trillion impact on the economy. And transform everything, a new industrial revolution. He then went ahead and endorsed Universal Matter and said that Universal Matter was doing some great work, which over time could help to make that new industrial revolution occur. And then he, through one of our larger investors, who shall remain nameless, came to visit with Avadain. And we spent time together at this investor's house. And lo and behold, he then gives us the same endorsement he gave Universal Matter, which is that Avadain has the potential to help unleash this graphene revolution by using our material as an additive to transform other products and make them better. And so in, I guess, early October, he published this recommendation, and our investor base grew tremendously as a result of that. So if any of you have a chance, reach out to Melissa Bell, who's our shareholder engagement manager. I'm sure she will share that article with you. We can answer whatever questions you have. But I was blown away by what Gilder had to say, and he's even invited me to speak at the Cosm Technology Summit in Bellevue, Washington, in November on the graphene revolution. So he'll be moderating, and I'll be one of the speakers there on that particular topic. So stay tuned.
Congrats, Brad. That's fantastic. As we come towards the end, we're not quite done yet, but we've got a couple of questions here about the raise itself and kind of Avadain's plans for financing and what looks like it's coming next. If anyone, as we get through this line of questioning, if anyone else who's watching has questions, now's the time to kind of throw your questions in the Q&A function. We'll get to them as soon as we can. But let's see here. A question here from Philip. Brad, what is the desired end goal of this capital raise for Avadain? Are you planning to have a persistent standalone company or hoping to be acquired by a quote unquote larger fish?
So our exit strategy has remained the same from the very beginning. And our biggest investor is Panasonic Corporation. And so they and we are completely aligned right now on this. We believe that once we have 10 licensed manufacturing production lines up and running, generating $200 million a year for Avadain in recurring revenue, that we will then have demonstrated the success of our business. And we will be right at the beginning of the proverbial hockey stick of growth. We believe at that point, we become a very, very attractive acquisition target, because companies with deep pockets that have a lot of people and resources will want then to benefit from the growth that they can see Avadain achieving, given more money and becoming a bigger company. And We, of course, all of this is based on our best assumptions, but we believe that at that point we can command somewhere between a 5x and a 15x multiple of gross revenue. So, meaning between $1 billion and $3 billion, to address what we think is $100 billion market. So it's a win-win for everyone. So that is our exit strategy. We don't discount any other possibility, and I'll assure everyone that we are 100% committed to doing what is in the shareholders' best interest. And I have given my word to a lot of our most active shareholders that when the time comes, we're going to consult with them about our exit strategy, because of the nature of crowdfunding, many of our investors are an informal board of directors. Okay. There are groups, the Harvard Business School Alumni Angels are the biggest single group of investors in Avadain this year by far. Probably we're up around $800,000 this year from them. And they take a very great personal interest in what we're doing. And so we have regular conversations, and they want to be consulted. Other people want to be consulted as well. So when the time comes, we will consult about the exit strategy, and we're open to whatever makes sense. But we have to have a target that we're aiming for, and the target is that exit strategy between 2026 and 2028.
That's great. And one other question from Gene along those lines is, Gene asks, when will there be an IPO? So maybe you want to address that possibility or lack thereof.
Sure. So the capital markets, Wall Street, really punishes licensing companies. And part of the reason for that is that they're not used to it. Okay. It's nothing personal. They're just not used to it. So you have a licensing company on a growth path. They take a conservative projection of what that is. They take the net present value of that with a high hurdle rate, and then they risk adjust it. And so what happens with IPOs traditionally for licensing companies is they're just buying you out with your own cash flow. There's no great money to be made because they're keeping that as a risk adjusted factor in their calculation. So they, assuming we were correct, they make all the money, not us. And so IPOs typically don't work for a licensing company. That doesn't mean that in the future that might not change. And if it changes, hey, we're in this to give the maximum return to shareholders. But the exit strategy I articulated of acquisition by a sophisticated player who understands the growth in the market and is competing against hopefully many other players, that is where we think the optimal return for our shareholders will be.
Thanks, Brad. And then, again, the last question I can see so far on the raise is, assuming this is the last raise, what's the best way to stay informed on Avadain's progress?
So that has to have come from Curtis, because I saw an email from him about that. I haven't had the time to respond to most of the emails today. Apologies to everybody. So we do obviously, because it's so time consuming, working on crowdfunding. I mean, it really is. But, our goal is to go back to quarterly updates for all the Netcapital investors. What we do is we send it to Netcapital, and then Netcapital sends it to you. Then we have a very few direct investors, and then we send it to them directly. So Curtis invested through Netcapital, so you would get it through Netcapital. There are some people on this call who invested directly. You would get it directly from us, but it would be the same information.
Yeah, and I can add a little bit here, Brad. So on behalf of Netcapital and anyone who invests via Netcapital, we'll do our very best. Like Brad said, Brad will give us the information. We'll distribute it via email and also make it available to you via your dashboard. And we're always working on better tools to keep investors updated on their investments and how things are going. These are obviously private investments, so unlike the stock market, you don't see constant up and down. But you will have the opportunity to kind of hear from Brad and see and hopefully follow Avadain along as they progress. So yeah, basically anyone who invests via Netcapital, you can come back to the site, check your dashboard, see your investment, and get the updates there.
Yeah, and people should feel free, please, if you want to respond, send your email to Melissa, okay? Because if you send it to me, I try really, really hard to answer all my emails, but it definitely isn't 100% perfect. If you send it to Melissa, it's 100% perfect. And so send it to her. She can then put it to the right person on the team, get you a response promptly, and we'll keep going. But if you have suggestions, send them in. If you have questions, send them in. This is your company, so be as active as you are comfortable with.
And I'll take another second to kind of defend Brad and also all the entrepreneurs who are raising on Netcapital. As investors, it's really well, obviously, every investor can be a really great resource for ideas, suggestions, all that stuff. You should send them to any entrepreneur. Getting an outside perspective is always helpful. But also as investors, we always want to know what's going on and we want to see what's going on with our investment. But remember, everybody, Brad's job is to go work for you and spend his time making money and doing the things he needs to do to grow Avadain. And so every minute he's responding to investor emails is a minute he's not working on the rest of the business. So I always encourage investors to have a little bit of patience, wait for those quarterly updates. Obviously, if you've got something urgent, you should send it in, as Brad said. But also, I'll give a little fresh perspective and say, make sure you let entrepreneurs go and work on their business to try to do the best for you.
Thank you. Thanks.
No problem. Great. We're getting towards the end of our questions and we're coming kind of towards the end of our time here. We got about 10 minutes left. If anyone's got any last minute questions, please throw them in now. I'm going to work through the last couple before we wrap up for the evening. So, Brad, I know we talked about this a little earlier in the call, but we've got a couple different questions about IP. So I figured that seems like a hot topic. Let's circle back to it for a second. We've got a question from Titus and Eugene. Both asking basically, can Avadain's patents protect it? And if so, for how long? So if you want to just kind of circle back to that for a second, I think that it seems like there's a lot of interest in it.
Sure. Let's do IP strategy 101 for just a second. And I'm certainly happy to get into as much detail as anybody wants. So a patent lasts 20 years. So the answer is 20 years is the amount of time the patent lasts. But think of this as a rolling protection. Our first patents were filed in 2016, so they would end in 2036. But this year we filed 2 new patents, which are very relevant to the continuous production of graphene. So they were filed in 2023. They would end in 2043. So we are constantly looking at what IP is really, really important and filing new patent applications on that. I expect fully next year to file 1 or 2 at the very least of new patents. So that not only creates broader protection for us by having more patents protecting the technology, but it also keeps throwing forward the length of time the patent lasts. Why is that important? Because we're licensing the technology, and the licensing is based on the patents. Without patents, you can't do licensing because there's no reason anyone would pay you. If we have patents, then we can tell people that they have to stop infringing us or we have to sue them. Okay, so that's why people take licenses. And so as we file new patents that are critical to the process, not just ephemeral, but really truly central to what we're doing, that pushes forward the licensing period that we can receive royalties. That then increases the valuation of the company. So you get more towards the 15x than the 5x. So that's what the patent strategy is. Having said that, we do keep certain things trade secret. And the reason for that is that trade secret has two advantages. First, it's not time limited. And second, in a patent, you have to disclose everything in order for the patent to be valid. So you can't write half of the idea in a patent and expect the patent to be valid, because anyone skilled in the state of that particular art, that technology, has to be able to replicate the results, the claimed results, for the patent to be valid. And if you don't disclose everything, then you run the risk of the patent being invalidated. On the other hand, if you keep certain things that are not obvious as a trade secret, then you prevent infringement. Our friends in China, for example, they'll be scratching their heads saying, wait, just a second, this doesn't work. Well, yeah, it doesn't work because we didn't mention a few things. And so that's what a trade secret does for you. So it's a combination of predominantly patents to a much lesser degree, but nevertheless important trade secrets. And so that's what the strategy is. Continue patenting, get as many patents for critical aspects of the technology as possible, and then keep just a few things as a trade secret. And that helps to increase the value of the company from the acquirer's perspective.
Thanks, Brad. Thanks for walking us through that. I think that was super helpful. It looks like we're getting towards the last question. If anyone wants to sneak one more in, I'll let one more in before we go. But a fun one to finish it off. Simon asks, has anyone invested from the UK? It looks like there's someone from Manchester, so he's super proud that Avadain was created there.
Well, Simon is from Manchester and he's invested. So yeah, no, that's absolutely right. Simon, I really don't. I'm sure other people from the UK have invested, but no one's name comes to mind as we sit here today. I can't think of anyone. I can say that we have people from all over the world. And one of the great joys every morning when I get my coffee and open up my computer and go to our Netcapital site is to see the names of people from countries all over the world. Now, clearly, most of them are probably from the United States. I don't have access to that information, but it wouldn't surprise me at all. But we have people from Japan that I know of, from Taiwan, from Singapore, Hong Kong, which may or may not be part of China, India. We have a bunch from Singapore, and people all over the world. So other places, Germany. Andreas is not on this call, but he's been one of our loyal investors from Germany. Australia. So it's a really international mix. We're really democratizing graphene here.
And our goal is to democratize investing. So appreciate that, Brad, and appreciate you being on this journey with us. It's been great to let all these people invest.
I'm the one who has to thank you, because I remember when I first came to talk to Tom Smith about Avadain and graphene, I could just see his face. It was like, this guy is absolutely crazy. How do I get off this call? Nothing could do this. I can't believe this at all. And then I had to convince him that it was really for real. And now, of course, we have a great relationship. We decided to go crowdfunding with Netcapital, and it was a calculated risk, because if it didn't work, it could have had negative implications for us. We did our first crowdfunding round last year. We hit 1.36 million. We thought that was the best thing since sliced bread. There's just no doubt about it. It brought us potential end users, customers, opened up all kinds of doors. And now we have reached $4.285 million, which is just unheard of in this time. While the VC market is down, crowdfunding is down, investor confidence is down, because of Netcapital, we have been successful. And everyone who's a loyal investor of Avadain needs to thank Netcapital for helping us.
Well, you're too kind, Brad. It's been a great partnership. Excited for these next and kind of last 24 hours in this go around. Thanks everyone for coming in and listening. I'm going to put one more time the link to the Avadain page in, just to make sure that everyone can reach it if they want to. Go take a look. If it's right for you, feel free to make an investment. And if anyone's got questions about Netcapital, our team's always available at team@netcapital.com. You can shoot us a note, ask us questions, and we'll get back to you just as soon as we can. Brad, anything else you want to share with everybody before we wrap up?
No, I just want to, yes, there is one thing. I want to thank all of our investors because you have made this possible. We have so far exceeded our expectations for this capital raise, and you're giving us the freedom to be successful. And I can't tell you how much we appreciate that and what you're doing. And truly, whether you've invested $250 or there's one person on this call who invested $300,000, every person has made a difference here, and I sincerely appreciate it. Our whole team appreciates it. So thank you, and let's keep our fingers crossed that we reach 4.495 million tomorrow night.
I'll keep my fingers crossed for you, Brad. And I echo Brad's sentiments. Thanks everyone who's invested. You're making a real difference. It's much appreciated from both of the teams at Netcapital and Avadain. If any questions come in, feel free to ask them on Avadain's discussion board or send an email to Netcapital. Thanks everyone for joining this evening. Brad, thanks so much for taking the time. We really appreciate it. And best of luck as you close out the campaign.
Well, thank you so much for this opportunity, Rob. Thanks to you and the whole Netcapital team. I appreciate it.
Appreciate it. All right, everybody. Have a good night. Take care.
Thank you.